Our forefathers weren't the Pilgrims. We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. The rock was landed on us. The rock was landed on us. The rock was landed on us.
Before the Pilgrim Fathers landed at Plymouth, we were here. Before the Pilgrim Fathers landed at Plymouth, we were here. Before the Pilgrim Fathers landed at Plymouth, we were here.
So you got to really know your real history. And then a lot of Asiatics notice, but if they tell that real history, they can't keep on promoting the diaspora, which is partly fiction. Because they didn't bring us from anywhere. We were already here. We were here for thousands of years.
Peace, 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 peace. What's going on with you? Rami Salam Mel here. This is my nationality card. I just want to put that on the record and read this on the back real quick, and then we're going to get right to it. This nationality and identification card bears the great seal of the Moroccan Empire. The bearer of this card is a Moorish American national, in propria persona, aboriginal and indigenous to northwest of Mexum, southwest of Mexum, and northwest Africa, which is North America, the North Gate, including Central America, South America, and the adjoining islands, Americana. All right, so the question of the day: are Moors indigenous? Are so-called black people, so-called African Americans, colored people, are they really aboriginal and indigenous? Could it be? Yes. But I don't want you to believe me. No, this is not what this is about. This is not about religion. This is not about beliefs, baby. No, no, no. This is about truth. This is about the facts. This is about information. So grab a pen, get some paper, get your Googles out. We're going to get to studying. First up, when we talk about are Moors indigenous and aboriginal, or are they not? First, we need to understand and have a clear understanding on what indigenous and aboriginal means. So, got a dictionary ready. We are going to be getting into this one here, the Random House Dictionary of the English Language. Oh, matter of fact. Before we get there, this is 1828, the American Dictionary of the English Language. I just wanted to pull this out and see if they had aboriginal and indigenous in here, because those words seem to be a little more modern. Oh, never mind. Aboriginal. An original or primitive inhabitant. The first settlers in a country are called aboriginals. As the Celts in Europe, and Indians in America. Aboriginal. First, original, primitive. Yeah, aboriginal, primitive. Cool. So let me see if we got indigenous. And we're going to get to Indian. Indian is very interesting. We're going to get there in a second. Just to clear up something, because I know most people in these days and times, they have an idea of what Indian means in their mind, but I don't think that's necessarily the truth, or most accurate, I should say. Indigenous. Okay, an indigenous is native, born in a country, native, produced naturally in a country or climate, not exotic. Well, now it's talking about like being applied to vegetables, but from the country, native. And now let's get back to Random House Dictionary. Indigenous is defined as, and also this is an adjective, so it's describing the people, but it's not a noun. You can't say, the aboriginals, even though that's being applied to the the people in Australia, the aboriginals in Australia, they're called aborigines, but that's really like an adjective just to say the first people, the original people. So really those are the Australians, and the other people are colonizers. But anyways, back to this. Indigenous, originating in and characteristic of a particular region or country. Native, innate, inherent, natural. Latin, from Latin, indigen, native, original, inhabitant. Okay. And then, yeah, Aboriginal, page 5. Aboriginal. Of or pertaining or typical of Aborigines. Original or earliest known, native, indigenous, the Aboriginal people of Tahiti. And so right below it, it has Aborigine, just so we know what we're talking about. From the very beginning, from the source or origin. Hello. One of the original or earliest known inhabitants of a country or region. Okay. So, now that we have an understanding, an indigenous person, or a person who is an indigenous and an aboriginal, is one that is an original, one of the natives of that country or that region, or the earliest known inhabitants of that region. Okay? So now that we have an understanding, now let's ask the question. Are so-called black people, African Americans, people of color, Negroes, black Americans, are Moorish Americans indigenous and aboriginal, and specifically to the Americas? It's an interesting question. Oh, wait. Before we get to that, Indian, that's right. Before we get to that, we're going to get to Indians. I wanted to bring this up because we're talking about the Americas. Black's Law Dictionary. This is the 4th edition. And in here, they have the definition for Indians as it's applied in law, which is very important because we're talking about law in some respects, and we're talking about how we can use our rights as Aboriginal and indigenous people. So law is important. We got to know what it means in law also. Indians, and I checked in here. Actually, I don't know if I checked Aboriginal. I couldn't find indigenous. We're gonna come back to Indian. Don't trip. I just want to double check. And side note, this is really what it's all about, man. You got to study. You got to put in the work. Aboriginal. No. So, a definition for Aboriginal or indigenous isn't in the law dictionary, but Indians is. Indians, the Aboriginal inhabitants of North America. Aboriginal inhabitants of North America. So now we understand in law. We understand what it means in our dictionaries. We have a clear reference. So now, are Moors Aboriginal indigenous to North America, like it says on my nationality card, or on any Moorish American's nationality card, maybe you should say. But is that the case? Are we? Don't listen to me on this. Let's listen to someone else for a moment.
We've got Dr. David Imhotep to tell us his history lesson that we need to know. Welcome, Dr. Imhotep. And I should say, you have a PhD in ancient African history.
That's correct.
And that's kind of unusual.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So congratulations on that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. How did you get interested in this area?
It was part of my dissertation led this way, but I could not vary to another subject when my other subject here. So I said, later on I will write something about that because it's not important in my dissertation at this moment. So that's why I did the book as soon as I finished my dissertation.
Wow. And we should say, and we have a picture of the book too, and it's the first Americans were Africans. And we were talking about Dr. Ivan Van Sertima because I remember back in the 1980s, my dad took me to hear him. He came here to Cincinnati, and his book was They Came Before Columbus, and he talked about you know, how Africans were here. He had a lot of, I mean, great research information, and so it was just kind of eye-opening, but we haven't heard a lot about that recently. So tell us how you got involved here.
Well, I'm showing that Africans not only came before Columbus, they came before the Indians.
So you're going even farther back.
I'm going farther back, at least 56,000 years old.
Okay, now we've got a graphic up here about 130,000 years ago.
Yeah, well, they sailed over here. And when I lecture, people say, well, wait a minute, humans weren't sailing, let alone they weren't boating 130,000 years ago. And I beg to differ. Last year, New York Times quoted the BBC, and they wrote an article on how in Crete they have found a stone industry of stone tools going back to at least 130,000 years. And Crete has been an island for in the middle of the Mediterranean for 5 million years. So they had to sail, and it was a continuous civilization, which means they were going back and forth. They knew how to navigate. So if they got to Crete 130,000 years ago, it's easy 70,000 years later that they could make it to the Americas at 56,000 years ago.
Right. That's really, now how did you even get back to this research? I mean, this is just, you know, did you start by reading They Came Before Columbus, and then you expanded on that research?
Yes. You see, that was 36 years ago, Dr. Van Sertima's book came out, and this information is piled on for 36 years. So many different things, so many cutting-edge articles and things have been found since then.
Yeah, and so, and what's the reaction you get when you talk about how Africans came here even before Native Americans?
People are amazed. They're shocked. They're shocked. First come shocks, and then they're smiling, and some frown, of course.
And then, you know, and what about the school systems? Because, you know, have we gotten this information to the educational system?
Not yet. The book has only been out for a month and a half.
And what kind of feedback are you getting, though, when you go around and talk about this? I mean, I'm assuming you're doing lectures around the country.
Yeah, well, I always bring my peer-reviewed articles.
Okay.
Because my thesis, which is the same as my title, The First Americans Were Africans, is backed up by 7, soon to be 8, peer-reviewed journal articles, which is the height of academia.
Wow. And so you've got credibility. I mean, people can see this research. What do you think? Do you think this is going to change history at all?
Well, for hundreds of years in Europe, people thought the world was flat, and it took a while for them to be able to say the world was round in order to go out there and navigate and see that it was indeed round. So it's going to take a little while for them to get around this, but it will happen.
Well, and tell us a little bit about these Africans who came before the Indians, before Columbus.
Okay, they came here, and they were first. They came to Pedra Fiorida, which is northeastern Brazil, and you'll see that that's the closest point from Africa to South America. And by canoe, a fellow, a navigator who was a doctor, wanted to prove that it could be done just in a canoe, and he set out in a canoe with a supply ship, but it did not touch him. He had a canoe with no oars, no paddle, no sail, nothing. He just sat there, and the currents took him straight from Africa to here. You've heard about people, if you throw a bottle in the water with a note, it'll come over. Yes, there are rivers in the ocean, currents. And it took him 52 days only. So you put a large sail on that vessel, and you get here in less than a month.
So it's definitely possible. We know that. It's physically possible.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so what part of Africa were the Africans from who came to Brazil?
Well, the DNA, the Genome Project found that the earliest ones, the ones that they found in Tierra del Fuego, in the very tip of South America in 1874, 1876, were the short Africans, the Khoisan, who spoke with clicks, like that. The Gods Must Be Crazy did a movie on that.
Yeah, I remember that, yeah.
Yes. So they have
about the Coca-Cola bottle that fell in, yeah.
Yes, they have the oldest DNA and the oldest language on the planet, and they were all over.
Oh, wow.
All over all 3 Americas, as well as Asia.
Well, have they done any DNA tests in Brazil to see that?
Yes, they have. The Genome Project went all around the world. There are 100,000 people participated.
Wow.
Taking DNA swabs.
And so first we know that it's possible to get over here by canoe, and second of all, the DNA from that group of Africans is in Brazil.
The most important thing, not to forget, to ask me, well, I will tell you that, where do the Native Americans come from? Well, we've always been taught that they came across the Bering Straits from Asia. This is true, but they did not come until 3000 BC. There is no evidence of them coming before 3000 BC. So for 53,000 years, there were nothing but Africans in North, Central, and South America.
Wow.
When they come over 3000 BC, those two groups, the Africans and the Mongolians, get together, the Asians, get together, and their children are the Native Americans.
Wow.
This is why the Native Americans do not look Chinese. They are a little different than Chinese.
Right. Oh, that's, you know what, I mean, we need to learn. It makes a lot of sense, Dr. Imhotep, and we need to learn our history.
Yes.
So I think it's fantastic that you've written this book, and I know people are wondering, how did they get The First Americans Were Africans, documented evidence. I love this. And it's by Dr. David Imhotep. How do we get this book? I have a phone number.
Amazon.com.
Okay, Amazon.com.
Yes.
Okay.
The most important group or culture we have in Mexico, well known as the Olmeca. Yeah! But the Olmecs, not from the Yucatan. The Olmecs from Veracruz, right?
Veracruz.
The Gulf of Mexico
Sí.
is where we have San Lorenzo, which is the most important site about the Olmecs. The Olmecs, one of the nicknames for the Olmecs in Mexico, it is Cultura Madre.
Cultura Madre.
Cultura Madre. Do you understand that?
For what?
Say it again.
Cultura Madre.
Madre, the mother of...
The mother of the cultures.
Oh. Okay.
Cultura Madre, the mother of the cultures, right? Because it is considered as the first, I mean, culture on this continent that so much people nowadays likes to consider like almost a little bit more than 3,000 years before Jesus Christ.
Break it down.
A new discovery which has not yet been published. It relates directly to the black communities across America. After here, I'm going to Bimini. As she said, I'm also going to be speaking at the Ouachita Conference again in Louisiana about this. But before I tell you about that, people will say, well, big deal, so what? Why is history important at all? History is extremely important. Imagine if I could take from each one of you as an individual everything you knew about life up to last week and just erase it. Where would you be? You'd be lost. You'd be incompetent. You wouldn't know how to plan for the future. And you do the same thing with a people. If you erase their history or you don't tell enough about their past, they also become incompetent and they can't fulfill the future. And that's why a lot of people in the black community have felt, well, how come all of the dreams of the civil rights movement aren't yet fulfilled? And one reason is because this history is still suppressed. It still isn't taught. But there's been a recent discovery which is going to blow the lid off of all that. And that's what I'm going to talk about. Now, basically, what science has now found, although this is suppressed for the most part, there have been some great researchers. You have some wonderful books there, like by Ivan van Sertima, who's talking about these things. This is not taught in your public schools, although it will be. The history that the children are learning today is not going to be history that's going to be taught in the next 25 years. It's going to be radically different. We now know for a fact that long before Columbus, there were 4 major migrations of blacks to the Americas, different parts of the Americas, for totally different reasons, totally separated from each other by many centuries. But nonetheless, there were these black, you can call them migrations, but they were not entirely. I'll describe, and you can make up your own mind what they were. The most recent of these took place about 400 years before Columbus was even born, and it's all outlined in a marvelous book over there. It's called The Golden Trade of the Moors. And it is now known that the West African Kingdom of Mali had huge fleets of merchant vessels, and that these kings, these black kings of West Africa, began sailing across the Atlantic to Mexico as early as 900 AD. Now, why did they do that? They did that for trade, not for conquest or invasion. They did this for trade. Mali was very wealthy in gold. They had lots of minerals. Some of the black kingdoms, they were called the Yoruba or the Benin. They were great workers in bronze. But the trouble with West Africa, and it's still a trouble today, not enough food, famine. Somehow, the black kings of Mali had preserved this tradition of long before, where there was this kingdom across the sea, a totally different one. It was very hard to reach. You needed to have excellent ships and good sailors, and nobody in Europe was doing it at this time. But if you cross that sea, this other kingdom across the Atlantic was very rich in a certain kind of food, which the people over there called maize. We now call corn. And these West African kings launched at least 2 major fleets, trading ventures, that went across the Atlantic 900 AD to about 1600 AD. And they brought over their bronze work, and they taught the Mexican people, the ancient Mexican people, who were then known as the Mayas. The Mayas had built up a great kingdom of their own, but in 900 AD they were in decline. They were really on the outs. Nobody knows exactly why, but their society was in decline. They were losing all of their technology. Then this these black fleets came across from West Africa, from Mali, and they presented a lot of gold work, bronze work, and in return, they came back with shiploads of corn, maize. Now we know for sure that this actually happened because very recently, you'll see in the next issue of our magazine, not this issue, the next issue is coming out in about 2 weeks. This is part of the discoveries are happening so fast and furious, it's hard to keep track. They now have found that a certain type of maize or corn which is growing in West Africa, has been growing there for many centuries, is not native to West Africa. It is a type of corn which comes from Mexico, could have only been brought over by these Mali seafarers over 1,000 years ago. So this is a first concrete proof that they beat Columbus by centuries, and were not just on a voyage of exploration. They were going back and forth, bringing corn back. Now, why don't we know about that? Well, this trade stopped abruptly 1600 AD. 1600 AD, the Spanish, the Portuguese were on a real aggressive colonizing campaign, and they took over Africa, and they destroyed a lot of these kingdoms.
All right. Now, you've seen the evidence. You've seen the facts. So-called black people, African Americans, people of color, we've been here for quite a long time on this side. Not just over there, not just in Africa, not just in the northern part, in Morocco and Mauritania. No, no, no. We've been in the Americas also. Yes, for thousands of years. But, and I forgot something when I was reading the definitions of earlier. I wanted to read, and this is coming out of, again, the American Dictionary of the English Language. I want to read the definition of American real quick. American, a native of America, originally applied to the Aboriginals or copper-colored races found here by Europeans, but now applied to the descendants of Europeans born in America. Let me read that again so you catch that. A Native American, an American, is a native of America. Okay, that's one. That's connecting the quote-unquote Indians. Hold on. Originally applied to the Aboriginals. Hello. Or copper-colored races. So Aboriginals in America are also copper-colored. I just so happen to have some copper. Yes, these are actual copper coins. And if you see there, I mean, we're not quite black. I'm wearing black. And I got copper. You tell me which one matches up a little bit better. You know, I don't know. You're going to have to tell me. The copper color races found here by the Europeans. So the Europeans are the foreigners coming here. Word to Christopher Columbus. So-called discovered. But now applied to the descendants of Europeans born in America. Sound like some identity theft going on. But never mind that. So, to summarize, what is an Aboriginal or an indigenous person? One who is native and an original inhabitant of a country or region. Okay? So the one who was there, the earliest known peoples that was in that area. Those are considered Aboriginal and indigenous people. Second part are blacks, so-called blacks, so-called African Americans, so-called people of color, aka Moors. Are we indigenous, Aboriginal? Yes. And where are we Aboriginal and indigenous to? North, Central, and South America and Northwest Africa. Yes. We were on both sides. We were on all of that. I mean, ultimately, we understand that we were around the entire planet. But more specifically, we know from the evidence that we were definitely in the Americas for a long time. So now the question is, what do we do with that? What do you do if you understand and you, I know I'm a Moor and I'm Aboriginal and indigenous. So what? What do I do now? Mr. Moorish American? And where your feds at? What are we going to do with that? Is that going to give me some money in my pocket? Is that going to pay a bill? Is that going to give me my land? Well, I'm glad you asked that question. I want you to look at this.
And as you know, in April, we announced that we were reviewing our position on the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And today I can announce that the United States is lending its support to this declaration. The aspirations it affirms, including the respect for the institutions and rich cultures of Native peoples, are one we must always seek to fulfill. And we're releasing a more detailed statement about U.S. support for the Declaration and our ongoing work in Indian country. But I want to be clear. What matters far more than words, what matters far more than any resolution or declaration, are actions to match those words. And that's what this conference is about. That's what this conference is about. That's the
Hey, man. Obama did his part, man. He was trying to do the best he could in the position that he was in and still make it out alive. Respect him. Question we got to ask ourselves, did we do everything we needed to do? Were we at those conferences on the rights of indigenous people? Were we making our voices heard? We making our position and our stances known? I don't think so. I'm going to create another video after this that goes in depth into every article of the rights of indigenous people. And we're going to examine the United Nations and how we can actually use that. If you're interested, if you are on board with that, please send me an email, iamhhtemple@gmail.com, or just say, hey, I'm interested in the comments below. So that way I can make sure that you are involved in this process so that we can move forward together as a unit. Because ultimately, whatever we're trying to do, we got to do it together. It can't just be, oh yeah, that dude Rami or that other Moore, let him do it and let's see how it works out. It doesn't work like that. We got to all step up to the plate. That's how we're going to change things. And with that, much love. Keep studying. Please read any and everything that Noble Drew Ali put out. Read it all because it's extremely important, especially that Circle 7 Quran, also known as the Quran of the Moorish Holy Temple of Science, the Quran of the Moorish Science Temple of America. And it's not just a religious book. We can use that as evidence, and it can't be dismissed because this country, the United States of America, one of the principles is freedom of religion. That's what makes that book and Noble Drew Ali such a genius and such a prophet. But with that, much love. Keep shining. Yeah, that's it. Peace.